When I, Will Lawson, met Linda Peters, I realized she had a passion, bridge. She had apparently been playing since 8th grade and mostly with her longtime partner Garrett Wynn had reached Master of the Sport status by the time she turned 19. She was a bronze medalist in the sport by the time she turned 22 and was a silver medalist at age 24 when I met her. Shortly after I met her, she proudly stated that two of her main goals in life were to become a grand master of the sport of bridge, to reach the highest level attainable, and more importantly, to win the World Mixed Doubles Championship. When I was first introduced to Garrett, I was very suspicious. He's a good-looking guy, my age, a year older than Linda, outgoing, and he and Linda seemed to have a real relationship, even though they didn't. I was relieved, however, when I later met his wife, Cecilia. Cecilia is pretty, short, playful, and has a very nice trim body, including a spectacular ass for a woman of about 50 pounds. I remember thinking, if Garrett has Cecilia, there's no reason to hit on Linda. Although Linda is, at least in my opinion, beautiful and sexy, she is very different from Cecilia. She's tall, brunette, large-chested, and demure, almost the exact opposite of Cecilia. Since most men have certain types, Linda is my type. I assumed that Linda was not Garrett's type, and after coming to that conclusion, I began seriously dating her. Linda seemed to fall in love with me almost as quickly as I fell in love with her. She seemed very happy to spend all her time with me, except when she was working or playing bridge. I wasn't surprised when she accepted my marriage proposal, and we had an engagement of only 3 months. It would have been 2 months and 3 weeks, but Linda and Garrett had a regional tournament one weekend during that time. Married life was good. Although Linda and I had quite a bit in common, including our musical tastes, our politics, and a penchant for working out together, usually with aerobic exercise 3 times a week and a long anaerobic session once a week, I thought it would be nice if I could share her love of bridge. For most of my life, though, I've played poker and hearts. I was above average at both, but had never tried playing bridge. My goal was not to replace Garrett in her doubles events, but just to make sure I could talk to her about it and go to some low-level tournaments out of town. I would need my own low-level partner to be able to play bridge. After thinking about it for just a few minutes, I thought, why not Cecilia? I liked Cecilia, and she had the same problems I had with her spouse's commitment to bridge. Also, she was at my beginner level. After Linda and I were married a few months ago, while Garrett and Linda were at a Saturday tournament, I called Cecilia and invited her to dinner on Saturday. She happily agreed. We had a nice chat while I made chicken parmesan. She helped us make the salad, and we drank a bottle of wine before and during dinner. After dinner, Cecilia and I secluded ourselves on the balcony of our apartment and put our feet up. Cecilia, besides just wanting to enjoy your company, I had another reason for inviting you over tonight. Have you ever thought of taking up bridge? After a brief pause and a guilty smile, she replied, Of course I have. I mean, it's very important to Garrett, and he's my husband, so I should. However, I will never reach his level, and I don't know if I would consider myself a failure. Besides, I'm not sure I have the guts for it. I grinned. I'm sure you have the guts for it. What if you could start playing with another beginner and could learn enough to talk intelligently about it with Garrett? And maybe go to some of the same tournaments out of town. Are you suggesting that to me, Will? She laughed. In a way, yes, I laughed back. I'd like to start learning bridge, but I need a partner. Who would probably be a better partner than you? I have absolutely no expectations or even desire to be in the same class as Linda and Garrett, but I'd like to have something else in common with Linda and an excuse to go to some tournaments out of town. Cecilia looked thoughtful for a second, then said, Shall we do this? Do we ask our spouses to teach us, or do we take classes, or what? Why don't we talk to Linda and Garrett on Monday and see what they suggest? In fact, why don't you two come to dinner on Monday and we can discuss it as a whole group, I said. Only if I can add a salad, dessert, and wine? What are you thinking of making as the main course? She replied. We talked about dinner, politics, movies, and many other topics, and before we knew it, the clock showed 2:36 a.m. Since we had finished almost 3 bottles of wine, I talked Cecilia into staying the night in our guest room. I fed her breakfast the next morning, and we parted with smiles on our faces. Even if it didn't work out with the bridge, I was glad I had made a very suitable and sweet friend. I was glad on Sunday closer to evening when Linda returned to report that she and Garrett had won a large number of points for third place in the sectional tournament from Saturday morning through early Sunday afternoon. I was happy not only for her, but for me too. You see, when Linda does well in a tournament, I enjoy great sex when she comes back. I could tell by the way she walked, the top 3 buttons of her blouse undone, and the smile on her face as she entered the apartment that it was going to be a good night. After we exchanged a scalding kiss, her arms wrapped around my neck and my palms resting on her ass, she giggled. "I took off my panties and bra in the lobby. I hope you didn't give the elderly tenants heart attacks or some young man with lustful ideas." I grinned. "Oh, I was very restrained," she giggled, "but you better take care of me, or I may have to go back downstairs to provoke some action." I started tickling her, and she started unbuckling my belt. I couldn't help myself. Before we fell asleep, I mumbled that Cecilia and Garrett were coming over for dinner the next night, and that I would make her favorite dish, fettuccine Alfredo. "That's nice, Will," she murmured, before falling asleep on my shoulder. Apparently, what I told Linda Sunday night about Cecilia and Garrett coming over for dinner Monday night didn't quite get through to her. While she didn't really take offense when I reminded her of it Monday morning, she didn't seem to show much enthusiasm about it, or the way it came across when Cecilia and I talked about it over dinner Saturday night, and she slept in the guest room Sunday morning. Nevertheless, by the time Cecilia and Garrett arrived and the smell of Alfredo sauce filled the kitchen, she was in high spirits. We had a great dinner, and as far as I could tell, Linda and Garrett were delighted with our interest in bridge. They gave us our first basic lesson that evening and advised us to sign up for a course at the community center. They agreed that our learning curve would be lower if Cecilia and I were partners. Over the next 2 years, I had a wonderful life. I received 2 promotions at work. Linda seemed to like her job, and she and I continued to do all the things we had in common, and our sex life was great, especially if she and Garrett did well in a tournament. In addition, Cecilia and I advanced in bridge and even went with Linda and Garrett to 2 tournaments that featured players of all levels, from the gold status masters that Linda and Garrett had become to beginners like Cecilia and me. In fact, next to Linda and one of my college buddies who lived nearby, Cecilia became my best friend. Linda and Garrett threw Cecilia and I a party when we got our first 2 master points, and more importantly, Linda rewarded me with sex that night that was even better than our usual awesome. Life was fantastic. Of course, now that I've said that, you know the but that follows. That but came in the form of another Saturday night dinner with Cecilia while Linda and Garrett were out for another late-night bridge competition. This dinner was at Cecilia and Garrett's home and was organized by Cecilia. After a pleasant meal discussing over a glass of brandy about many things, including our continuing bridge lessons, Cecilia said, "There's something serious I want to talk to you about, Will." "Dump it," I smiled, then took another sip of brandy from my glass. "I think Linda and Garrett are sleeping with each other at an out-of-town competition," she blurted out. Thankfully, I swallowed my last sip of brandy or it would have spurted from my nostrils. "What?" was my shocked reply. "What makes you think that?" "It started the first night we told them that one of the reasons we wanted to take up bridge was so we could go with them to some tournaments out of town," Cecilia grumbled. "I love you, Will, but I know you're one of the least observant people in the world, so I didn't expect you to notice it. But I did." After a meaningful pause, she continued, "What I noticed was a slight grimace from Linda and Garrett and a fleeting eye contact between them. They recovered quickly and seemed supportive afterward, but those grimaces and that fleeting glance were imprinted on my brain." "Of course, your suspicions are based more on that," I swallowed. "Yes, that's true. Did you notice that they did poorly in the 2 tournaments we accompanied them to? In one, they scored a total of 1 master point," she recalled correctly. Not the least bit embarrassed by my lack of response, she continued, "Have you noticed how hot they get when they come back from a competition where they did well?" I responded to that last comment. "Wouldn't that mean they weren't having sex with each other if they were horny when they got back?" "Just the opposite. They inspired each other and increased their libidos, and probably had guilt on top of that. So they were horny because they were having fun, Not because they didn't sleep together, she replied with a great deal of authority. Cecilia went on for another 20 minutes, with me occasionally asking questions or expressing doubts. When she was done, however, it occurred to me that there just might be something to what she had said. Although I didn't tell her about it, there was another factor that could help substantiate her suspicions. The times when Linda was most available, and even eager, were after she and Garrett had done well in the competition. Although I was far from convinced, I was willing to go along with Cecilia's suggestion to try to find out what was going on, if anything at all. That evening, we started planning. When Linda came back that Sunday, she and Garrett had gotten a bunch of red master points, and she was excited, so horny that I got some rare sex. Just before I fell asleep, my perfectly serene mood was ruined when Cecilia texted me. "Garrett happily slept with me tonight. Pleasant but disturbing," followed by a smiley face emoji with a frown. On Monday and Tuesday, Cecilia and I put the first part of our plan into action. Cecilia had several people she worked with who were tech-savvy, especially when it came to smartphones. We both replaced dead batteries in our spouses' phones, and when they expressed concern, offered to fix them in one day. I took Linda's phone to Cecilia's office on Monday and was able to return it to Linda by Tuesday evening. After distributing the phones to Cecilia's techie friends, we did two things. First, they installed locator apps on them so we could determine, presumably to within 7 meters, where they were. So, if Linda and Garrett's phones were within 7 meters of each other at midnight during a trip to an out-of-town competition, we'd know they were sharing a bed. The second thing that handing over the phones to Cecilia's technicians did was allow us to view any compromising emails, text messages, or photos. They provided this information to Cecilia, and she made a copy for me. And I didn't want to find out that Linda and Garrett were sleeping together for the obvious reason. I wasn't going to share my wife. I loved her and didn't want a divorce. However, it seemed that Cecilia almost wanted to find out that they were cheating, just to prove that she was right. Maybe not, but that's what it seemed like. Regardless of what any of us wanted to find, we made a promise to try to find out everything we could and rationalize what we would do with it. The emails, text messages, and photos that were discovered revealed nothing compromising. Although, as you would expect, many emails and text messages were deleted, there was nothing even remotely indicative of cheating. All communication between Linda and Garrett was friendly but not flirtatious, and there were certainly no displays of affection. In fact, I had to conclude that Cecilia and I interacted with each other with a higher level of tenderness than Linda and Garrett. There were also no expressions of displeasure between Cecilia and me, and the only risque pictures Garrett had on his phone were of Cecilia, and the only ones Linda had were of me. Also, Cecilia and I remembered our past observations of Garrett and Linda when they were together. There had never been, I mean never, any courtship. In fact, Cecilia and I were 10 times more affectionate with each other than Garrett and Linda. The next time Linda and Garrett left for a competition, Cecilia and I got together on Friday and Saturday nights. As expected, though, their phones actually overlapped each other during the competition, since they were sitting less than 1.5 meters apart and the app wasn't sensitive enough to determine that distance, or sitting next to each other at lunch or dinner. At night, their phones were a great distance apart, definitely more than the 7 meters the locator app was designed for. When Cecilia and I were on the phone with them both late at night, there was nothing suspicious either. In fact, I even stayed in Cecilia's guest room both nights so we could compare data in the middle of the night. The next part of the plan was to go with them to an out-of-town competition. We did this twice, and both times they apparently played poorly because they scored few master points and were in a bad mood afterward. We then tried a surprise appearance at out-of-town tournaments. At one event where they had to stay overnight on Saturday, I arrived around 9 p.m. I thought I had won when I got the key at the front desk, showing my ID, and unlocked room 428, Linda's room. Garrett was there looking over some bridge statistics. After a brief, irritable exchange of remarks, Garrett convinced me that he and Linda had gotten their rooms mixed up and that she was in 601. I hurried over there and found Linda looking at the bridge stats as well. She was clearly surprised, but seemed happy to see me, and we had good sex that night. The next morning, I left before breakfast so as not to interfere with her concentration. Linda and Garrett did well in that competition, and I got some good sex when she returned Sunday night. Cecilia did pretty much the same thing I did during a 2-day tournament about a month later. She also found them in separate rooms on Friday night, but also stayed overnight on Saturday and just went shopping and sightseeing in the city where the tournament was being held. Linda and Garrett were not very successful in this competition and were not happy when they returned. Over the next 2 years, we tried many other things. We were never able to come to anything definite, although Cecilia continued to be very suspicious, and I must admit that some things did not really add up. However, Linda was a loving and excellent wife, and the sex was between very good and great, except for those times, mostly when Cecilia or I went to a tournament out of town with Linda and Garrett, when things didn't work out. Then things would go south for a day or two, but quickly got back to normal. The World Mixed Doubles Championships in Geneva, Switzerland were approaching when things went south. The event, including time to overcome the time zone change, the registration reception, and then the game itself, lasted approximately 8 days. In the lead-up to the event, Garrett and Linda did everything they could to discourage Cecilia and me from attending, blatantly failing to tell us that we were not invited. In view of their miserable performances in the events that Cecilia and I participated in, was it just bad luck or something else? Cecilia and I decided to suspend our suspicions for a while so that they could have the best chance of success, since winning this tournament was their long-time dream. Maybe their most important lifelong dream. Linda had even talked about having children if they won. Their plane couldn't have been farther away than over the Atlantic that Saturday morning as they left when Cecilia called me in desperation. "Will, I just found out something in the last hour." I talked to John Tipton, the male part of the couple that is in most of the competitions Garrett and Linda go to. He doesn't seem to have any malicious intent, although Linda and Garrett beat him and his partner Judy Smith most of the time. He told me something very interesting. "What?" was my reasonable response. He said, and this just came up in casual conversation, I didn't say anything to him about my suspicions, that at every break Linda and Garrett go somewhere, and when they come back, they often have a change of clothes and their play is much improved. "How long do the breaks last?" I asked. "Are they different from rookie matches?" "Yes, they are different. 20-minute morning and afternoon breaks and 90 minutes for lunch and dinner, after which play resumes. Also, no one ever has lunch or dinner with them or sees them at lunch or dinner. Unless you or I are there," she snorted. I wasn't sure if they could make it during the 20-minute breaks, although I knew Linda well enough to know it was possible if she was motivated enough. However, they could certainly do it during lunch and dinner breaks. Neither of them were big eaters, and they could get full in 10 minutes. I must have been speechless for a long time because Cecilia asked, "Are you still here, Will? Earth to Will?" "Yes, I'm still here," I muttered. "Is any continuation possible?" "John says that Judy might know something. She's apparently not home right now, but she should be back this afternoon. I'll speak to her then," Cecilia replied. "Let me know," I mumbled and cut the call short. I couldn't really focus after Cecilia's call, so I cleaned up the garage a little mindlessly and then took a shower and just tried to watch the baseball game on TV until Cecilia called back. I was out of the shower only about 15 minutes later when Cecilia burst through my front door. By then, Cecilia and I were so friendly that we acted like family, and if the door was unlocked, we just opened it. The look on Cecilia's face was hard to read. It was definitely determined. Other than that, I couldn't tell if it was angry, pensive, or anything else. Usually, I could read her thoughts, but not this time. I stood up to greet her. She more or less dissolved into my embrace. After about a minute, I took her hands, pulled her away from me, looked her in the eyes, and asked, "What did Judy say?" A single tear appeared in Cecilia's left eye, and then she spoke in a quiet voice. "The only reason I'm not more upset is because for the past few years I've had an eerie feeling that they were asleep. Twice, Judy had seen them leave one of their rooms during their lunch break. They didn't see her, and she didn't want to characterize their looks, but from what she described to me, they were just sexy looks. The only good thing is that she never told anyone, including John. She's not a gossip." My heart dropped. but only for a few seconds because my attention was distracted by Cecilia punching me in the face. Not very hard, but hard enough for me to pay attention. When I looked at her with a puzzled expression on my face, she calmly said, "Over the next 8 days while they're gone, we have a few decisions to make. Right now, however, the only decision you need to make is what position you're going to fuck me in. I'm not going to burst into tears or question my femininity or attractiveness. I'm not going to just wring my hands. We really like each other, and let's see how much we like it." I really can't explain my mindset in the half hour or so that followed the "we really like each other" statement. I do know that I was shocked by her actions and impressed with her body when Cecilia took off her sundress in seconds, revealing no underwear whatsoever. I don't know how she managed it, but she pulled my pants down around my ankles, imprinting a scalding hot kiss on my lips. With a strength I didn't think a woman 155 centimeters tall and 50 pounds was capable of, she pushed me back onto the couch. Cecilia, on the other hand, was a master. I couldn't believe the difference in my sexual encounter with Cecilia compared to what I was used to with Linda. While Linda was an amazing sexual partner, even when I wasn't doing my favorite thing on earth, Cecilia was in her own way even better. The manner in which she rode me while I sat on the couch was uncanny. "Wow, that was fun. Now we need to talk. I suggest naked, in your bed." Cecilia helped me remove my shirt and socks, the only articles of clothing I was still wearing, and then jumped into my arms and asked me to carry her to my bed. I wish I could describe the rest of the week to you in great detail, but unfortunately my mind is clouded from too much sex, and I'm having great difficulty with deadlines, at least for the rest of Saturday, Sunday, and when she made me take Monday off from work. I also have a hard time believing that everything that happened actually happened. Cecilia had a plan. Since Garrett and Linda were due back the following Monday, Cecilia's plan involved the two of us sleeping in as many times as we could until Sunday morning at 6 a.m., and then taking Sunday and Monday off for sex to prepare for their return on Monday closer to evening. I didn't voice any complaints. In fact, Cecilia probably thought I was completely submissive to her because everything she suggested during our spouse's stay at the World Cup we did. It wasn't really about me being subservient. It was just that Cecilia was so much fun and had so many good ideas that I probably couldn't have come up with anything better. During this time, we each talked to our spouse once a day, before their first card session of the day. We were pleasant and didn't talk about anything. Not about their cheating over the years, nor about our ongoing celebration of sex. They were both in high spirits because they were really doing well. In fact, when we talked to them on Saturday, the last day of the competition, they were in first place and their excitement was palpable. Recharging our sexual batteries on the Sunday before our spouses were due home and before our phone call with them that afternoon, Cecilia and I sat in my living room some distance from each other so we wouldn't start pestering each other and have a serious fight. "Okay, kid, how are you going to deal with Linda and Garrett's cheating when they get home?" she asked. "I'm not really sure. Honestly, I love Linda, and it's hard for me to think about the future without her. But for the same reason, I don't want to be a wuss or a scapegoat either," I answered after much thought. "Also, I'm confused about what having you a few dozen times entails. You're probably pretty far behind me in your thinking, since I've been pretty sure of their cheating for 2 years, even though we only got confirmation 8 days ago. Let me tell you what I intend to do, though it's still largely up to you, since you could completely ruin my plans," she said. "Let's hear it," I smiled. At that moment, our cell phones rang almost simultaneously. I went outside to take Linda's call while Cecilia answered Garrett's in the living room. Linda was ecstatic. They had won. They had won the freaking mixed doubles world championship. She was so out of breath she seemed like she could fly to the moon any minute. I got a recap of the entire competition, including a description of the winning hand and the accolades she and Garrett had achieved. Then she told me how much she loved me and missed me, and promised me triple breast sex when she came back, which would be the first time in my life. I promised that Cecilia and I would be waiting for them at the airport Monday afternoon, and our banners wouldn't be too embarrassing. When I got back to the house, Cecilia was finishing up a conversation with Garrett. Of course, he was just as excited as Linda was. As soon as Cecilia pressed the red button on her phone, she jumped into my arms and kissed me hard. "What was that for?" I giggled as she jumped back and sat down on the couch. It's an expression of joy because what just happened makes everything easier. That's why will. How come? Just before the call, I started telling you what I was planning to do, and now, assuming your cooperation, I can make it happen. After the excitement of their victory subsides, including the victory party we throw for them, we tell them they have 2 more years to play bridge, and then we have kids, and the time for playing bridge is up. After that, it's just local bridge games, mostly friendly ones that fit into our kids' schedules. What about the next 2 years? I inquired. For the next 2 years, every time they go out of town for a competition, we stay home and party until they get home, she replied with a wide smile on her face. In the next minute, many thoughts instantly flashed through my mind. While some of these things seemed irrelevant to the final decision, the important things kept repeating themselves. I loved Linda. When I didn't know about Linda's infidelity, I was not only satisfied with my marriage, but very happy. Cecilia was a good friend, and even better in bed than she was as a girlfriend. Assuming Linda and Garrett were never together sexually again after giving up bridge, I would have been very happy staying married. After about 5 years of thinking, flashed through my head in about 60 seconds, I smiled and said, "I'm in," for which Cecilia gave me a big hug. She then pulled away, giving me a quick kiss and saying, "I have to stay away from you until you pick me up to take us to the airport Monday afternoon, because we both need to recharge, and if I'm with you, I'll have fun." After Cecilia and I picked Garrett and Linda up at the airport with, as promised, not too embarrassing posters, the following happened over the next 2+ years. I got my sex on Monday night when I picked Linda up from the airport. It was even better than I thought it would be, and reinforced to me that Cecilia's plan was the best course of action. We threw a great congratulations party for Linda and Garrett at the local country club. We invited all of our families, including cousins and all of our friends, over 200 guests in all. Linda and Garrett were thrilled and eternally grateful. A week after the party, Cecilia and I met with Linda and Garrett and told them that if they wanted to stay married, they had 2 more years of competition ahead of them, and then we would have kids and the only bridge competitions would be local. Surprisingly, they offered no resistance, stating that they had realized a lifelong dream in bridge, that they definitely wanted to live married to us, and that once the children were born, the tournaments would be canceled. For the next 2 years, they attended an average of 1 out-of-town tournament a month. While they were away, Cecilia and I were together the whole time, and we were comfortable with each other. We were so sexually satisfied that we didn't even think about what Linda and Garrett might be doing. Supposedly, the last time Cecilia and I were supposed to be together, and the last out-of-town competition Linda and Garrett were going to, after which both women immediately gave up birth control, Cecilia was acting a little strange. She tried to hide it, but sometimes she'd get tears in her eyes after we'd been doing it. The way she approached everything, it was much more like making love. 6 weeks after our last encounter, Cecilia took me out to lunch, on a blanket in the park on a beautiful spring day. After a light meal and some banter, she cut to the chase. "Will, I don't quite know how to say this, so I'm being blunt. I'm 6 weeks pregnant with your baby." "What did you say?" I aghast, thankfully without burping my Pepsi. "The last time we were together, I wasn't on birth control since I had my IUD removed a week before we made love. I know that's when I got pregnant." "How do you know that?" "After our last few meetings, I took Garrett's trace to the lab to have it tested. While it's possible that he could conceive, his sperm count is at an all-time low. In the meantime, I had your trace tested," she continued, not the least bit embarrassed. I was about to ask her how she got the sample from me, but quickly dismissed the thought. So she continued. "Plus, I just know in my heart that this is your baby. I will do a blood test after 11 weeks of pregnancy to confirm this and determine the sex of the baby." "What are you going to do?" I blurted it out without thinking. "What do you mean, what am I going to do?" She snapped at me. She took a deep breath and then said, "I'm going to have your baby. Especially if it's a girl, no one will suspect a thing since you and Garrett have the same eye and hair color, and the girl will probably look more like me than either of you." "You're going to keep this a secret?" "Yes, I intend to." Unless you and Linda divorce, at which point I'll divorce you too and claim you, she growled, crossing her arms over her chest and pouting her lips. It wasn't easy to digest, but there was nothing I could do about it except pretend to be happy. A wide smile appeared on my face, and I said, "I'll do my best to support you emotionally, and if you ever need money, I'll help with that too." Then I kissed her. There was a big smile on her face after our lips parted. 2 weeks after my lunch with Cecilia, as Linda and I were lounging in bed after a wonderful carnal session, she smiled and said, "I have good news and bad news. Which one do you want first?" I wrinkled my nose and then said, "Bad news." "In about 3 months, you won't have any entertainment for a while," she glowered. Of course, that's when I found out what the good news was. Linda was pregnant. I kissed her with a long, hot kiss, and then we gently made love. Cecilia's little girl, her exact replica, had been born 5 weeks before Linda and my little boy, who looked just like he did in my baby pictures. Both Linda and Cecilia took to raising their children like real parents. Our families remained close, although we never had the opportunity to romp, and except for Cecilia and I discreetly pinching each other's buttocks from time to time, there was no indication that it was even intended. Linda and I had another little boy just 2 years after our first. Although I wasn't paranoid or suspicious, just to reassure myself, I ran DNA tests on both my little boys and Cecilia's little girl. I was the biological father of all 3. Our firstborns were both 2.5 years old. All 4 of us loved being parents, and our lives were working out wonderfully. Both mothers had regained their pre-pregnancy bodies and were so damn attractive. Then Cecilia invited me to lunch in the park again. This time, she didn't beat around the bush. "Will, I want another child, and I want her or him to have the same biological father as my first." 10 months later, Cecilia gave birth to another sweet little girl. And it wasn't because of an immaculate conception.